I never thought a wooden jewelry box from my grandmother would become the breaking point in my relationship with my mother-in-law, Linda, but when she cleaned up my dresser during our housewarming and tossed my worthless trinkets into the garbage, she had no idea she'd just thrown away $2 million worth of rare gems that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. The look on her face when she discovered what she'd done wasn't just shock. It was the first time in 6 years that I saw the power dynamic between us completely shatter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I met Michael on a rainy Tuesday in April at a small coffee shop in downtown Boston. I was rushing to get to my job at the local art gallery, balancing my portfolio case in one hand and fumbling with my umbrella in the other when I collided with him at the doorway. My sketches went flying, the rain immediately threatening to ruin weeks of work. Instead of running for cover, Michael knelt beside me in the downpour, gathering my artwork and sheltering the pages with his jacket. By the time we made it inside, we were both soaked, laughing, and somehow I knew my life had just changed. What I didn't realize was that falling in love with Michael meant entering the orbit of his mother, Linda Blackwell, whose family name adorned buildings across Boston's financial district. The Blackwells weren't just wealthy, they were Boston aristocracy, old money with older opinions about who belonged in their world. And from our very first meeting, Linda made it crystal clear that a struggling artist with no pedigree definitely did not make the cut. "So, Sarah," she'd said during our first dinner at their Beacon Hill mansion, examining me over the rim of her crystal wine glass, "Michael says you work at some gallery downtown? How interesting. Is that something you plan to continue with? Long-term, or are you considering a more established career path?" Her emphasis on established carried the weight of generations of Blackwell expectations. Michael squeezed my hand under the table. "Mom, Sarah's not just working at the gallery. She's the assistant curator, and her own artwork is incredible. She has a showing next month." Linda's smile remained fixed, not reaching her eyes. "How lovely. Though I've always found modern art rather indulgent. Don't you think, Robert?" She turned to Michael's father, who barely looked up from his prime rib. "If it sells, he mumbled, which I would later learn was his way of remaining neutral in Linda's subtle power plays. That first dinner set the tone for our relationship. Over the next 2 years of dating Michael, I endured countless comments about my bohemian style, my modest upbringing in a small town outside Springfield, and especially about my grandmother's jewelry that I wore to every Blackwell function instead of the designer pieces Linda thought appropriate. "Darling," she'd whisper, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "those pieces are certainly unique, but for the charity gala next month, I'd be happy to lend you something more suitable. Something that won't make people think Michael is dating someone quite so eccentric." What Linda never understood was that my grandmother's jewelry collection meant everything to me. Nana Rose had raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. Her small house filled with the scent of fresh-baked cookies, and the sound of her stories had been my sanctuary. Every piece in her collection came with a tale. The amber pendant from her travels to Eastern Europe, the jade earrings from a California road trip in the 1960s, the strange rough-cut stones set in tarnished silver from her years living in South Africa. "These aren't just pretty things, Sarah Bear," she'd tell me as I sat cross-legged on her bed, watching her gently polish each piece. "These are memories you can hold. Everyone thinks value comes from diamonds and gold, but true value comes from the story behind the piece." When she passed away during my senior year of college, the wooden jewelry box and its contents were all I had left of her. Michael proposed to me on a sailboat in Boston Harbor, kneeling precariously as the vessel rocked beneath us. "I don't have a family heirloom to give you," he said apologetically, opening a velvet box to reveal a stunning but simple diamond ring. "I know your grandmother's jewelry means the world to you, and I didn't want to compete with that. but I hope you'll add this to your collection of memories." I cried as he slipped it onto my finger, not just because I was marrying the man I loved, but because he understood what mattered to me in a way his family never had. The wedding planning unleashed Linda in full force. What should have been a joyful time became a battleground of passive-aggressive suggestions and outright demands. When I mentioned using my grandmother's pearl hairpin as my something old, Linda actually flinched. "Sarah, dear, we'll be photographed by Boston Magazine. Wouldn't you prefer something a bit more significant? The Blackwell women have worn the same diamond tiara for generations. It would make Michael's grandmother so happy to see it continued." Michael tried to run interference when he could, but his job at an environmental conservation nonprofit, another family disappointment, kept him working long hours. The irony wasn't lost on me that while he fought to preserve natural habitats, I was becoming an endangered species in the Blackwell ecosystem. The wedding itself was a monument to compromise. We held it at the Blackwell family's summer estate, on the North Shore instead of the botanical garden I'd dreamed of. The guest list swelled from our planned 75 to over 300, most of whom were business associates and social connections I'd never met. I wore the Blackwell tiara during the ceremony as a concession, but changed to my grandmother's pearl hairpin for the reception, a detail that didn't escape Linda's notice or her tight-lipped disapproval. But it was after the honeymoon, when Michael and I purchased our first home together, that the real trouble began. The house was a modest Victorian in Somerville, not the Beacon Hill or Back Bay address Linda had expected, but a place we fell in love with for its character, its garden space where I could eventually have a small studio, and most importantly, its distance from Beacon Hill. "It has potential," Linda declared during her first visit, glancing dubiously at the original woodwork we adored and the vintage light fixtures we'd spent weeks hunting down. "Though I can't imagine why you've chosen this neighborhood when we could have helped you find something in a more appropriate area." The renovations became her newest battleground. She'd arrive unannounced with catalog printouts of furniture that would elevate the space, and paint swatches in various shades of beige to replace the rich colors we'd selected. Michael fielded what he could, firmly telling his mother that, while her input was appreciated, the final decisions were ours. But Linda had decades of experience wearing down resistance. "I'm just trying to help Michael," she'd say, her voice taking on the wounded tone that immediately made him backpedal. "Your father and I only want what's best for you both. Sarah has a lovely artistic eye, of course, but there's a difference between art and creating a home that reflects your position." My position. As if marrying Michael had assigned me a rank I was failing to maintain. The housewarming party was Linda's idea, or rather, her insistence. "You simply must officially introduce your home to society," she declared, already scrolling through her phone contacts. "I'll handle everything. All you need to do is approve the guest list and make sure the house is presentable." Michael squeezed my hand as we sat across from her at Sunday brunch, a weekly tradition I had come to dread. "Mom, we appreciate the offer, but Sarah and I want something small. Just close friends and family." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "And we can handle the arrangements ourselves." Linda's smile remained fixed as she patted her perfectly coiffed silver hair. "Darling, your first home is a milestone. It needs to be celebrated properly. Besides, this will be an opportunity for Sarah to connect with some of the right people. Her little gallery job is charming, but it's time to think about more sustainable networking." My little gallery job had recently promoted me to full curator, but correcting Linda had long ago proven pointless. She simply incorporated the new information into her narrative of my inadequacy and continued onward. "We'll have it catered by Anton, of course. His waiting list is months long, but he owes your father a favor from that business matter last year," she continued, ignoring the tension radiating from our side of the table. And we'll need to do something about those window treatments before anyone sees them. I've already contacted my designer. Linda, I finally interjected, setting down my mimosa with more force than necessary. We've already ordered custom curtains from a local textile artist. They're being installed next week. She blinked, momentarily thrown off script. Oh? Well, I'm sure they're very creative. But perhaps we could just see what Paolo suggests as an alternative. He does all the mayor's properties, you know. Later that night, as Michael and I got ready for bed, the frustration finally boiled over. Your mother acts like our home is some kind of project she needs to fix, I said, aggressively brushing my hair. Does she even realize how condescending she sounds when she dismisses everything I choose? Michael sighed, looking tired beyond his 32 years. She's always been this way, Sarah. Everything has to be perfect, has to project the right image. My entire childhood was a carefully curated experience. He sat on the edge of our bed, the vintage quilt another item Linda had suggested replacing. When I was 12, I wanted to put posters up in my room, just normal kid stuff, bands and movies I liked. She hired a youth space consultant instead who created a thematically appropriate display of masculine interests, including model, sailboats I never asked for, and framed vintage sports equipment I wasn't allowed to touch. I sat beside him, my anger softening into sympathy. That's actually really sad. It is what it is, he shrugged. But this is our house, not hers. We'll hold the line on the important things. But holding the line with Linda proved nearly impossible. Somehow, our small housewarming gathering transformed into a catered affair for 60 people, most of whom were connected to Blackwell Industries or Linda's various charity boards. The date moved from our preferred casual Sunday afternoon to a formal Saturday evening. Even the invitations, which appeared at our door in a box from Boston's premier stationer, described a cocktail attire housewarming reception neither of us had approved. It's just one night, Michael reasoned as I fumed over the engraved cards. We'll get through it, and then we can have our real housewarming with our actual friends later. I wanted to argue, to insist we cancel the whole charade. But I saw the resignation in his eyes, the look of someone who had fought this battle his entire life and knew when strategic retreat prevented all-out war. The week before the party, Linda's interventions reached new heights. She arranged for a professional cleaning service despite our protests, sent over floral arrangements that overwhelmed our modest spaces, and constantly texted with suggestions about everything from guest towels to coaster placement. Each message carried the same subtext: your home isn't good enough as it is. The day of the party, she arrived 5 hours early with an assistant and a car full of additional supplies. The caterers need at least 3 hours for setup, she announced, sweeping past me into our living room. And we need to rearrange some of these furniture pieces to create better flow for the number of guests. Linda, we've already prepared the space how we want it, I said, watching in horror as her assistant began moving our carefully positioned chairs. Sarah, dear, I've been hosting events since before you were born. Trust me on this. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Now, I thought we'd set up the bar in this corner, move this bookshelf temporarily into your office space, and... She paused, noticing the wooden jewelry box that sat on our mantel. What's this doing in the main entertaining space? It doesn't match anything in the room. Before I could stop her, she picked up my grandmother's box, her expression one of poorly disguised distaste. We should put this away somewhere for tonight. First impressions are everything, and this looks like something from a thrift store. That was my grandmother's, I said, moving quickly to take it from her hands. It stays where it is. Linda released the box with obvious reluctance. I understand sentimentality, Sarah, but there's a time and place. Perhaps your bedroom dresser would be more appropriate. The mantel is perfect, actually. I returned the box to its place of honor, adjusting it slightly. It's important to me that it stays visible in our home." She pursed her lips, but was prevented from further comment by the arrival of the caterers. For the next several hours, I watched our home transform into Linda's vision, elegant, impressive, and completely unlike the warm, creative space Michael and I had designed together. By the time guests began arriving, I hardly recognized my own living room. Michael did his best to stay by my side as we greeted the parade of strangers, most of whom seemed far more interested in networking with each other than in genuinely celebrating our new home. I plastered on a smile that grew stiffer by the hour, accepting backhanded compliments about our charming and unique decorating choices. "I love what you've done with the space," gushed a woman whose name I immediately forgot. "It's so brave to go with such vibrant colors when neutrals are so much more marketable for resale." "We're not planning to sell," I replied, taking a large sip of wine. "We're making this house our home." Of course," she nodded, her eyes already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. Though investment thinking is always wise, the Blackwells certainly understand that. By 9 o'clock, my cheeks hurt from forced smiling, and I desperately needed a moment alone. I slipped away to our bedroom, closing the door on the murmur of conversations and the subtle notes of classical music Linda had insisted would elevate the atmosphere over our preferred jazz. Our bedroom had largely escaped Linda's influence, remaining a sanctuary of our personal style. I sat at my vanity, a vintage piece I'd refinished myself, and opened my grandmother's jewelry box to find something that might help me feel more grounded for the remainder of the evening. Perhaps her amber pendant, which always gave me courage during difficult situations. But as I lifted the lid, a shock ran through me. The box was empty. Panic rising, I checked the drawers of the vanity, thinking perhaps I'd moved the pieces earlier and forgotten. Nothing. I searched the dresser, the bedside tables, even under the bed in case the box had somehow been knocked over. My grandmother's collection, decades of memories, the only physical connection I had left to her, was gone. I was on my hands and knees looking under the dresser when the bedroom door opened. "Sarah, what are you doing down there?" Michael asked, concern evident in his voice. "My jewelry is missing," I said, scrambling to my feet. "All of it. My grandmother's entire collection." "Are you sure you didn't move it somewhere safe before the party?" He began helping me search, opening closet doors and checking shelves. "Positive. I never moved that box. You know that." The panic was giving way to a horrible suspicion. "Your mother was in here earlier. She insisted on refreshing the guest bathroom and wanted to make sure our bedroom was presentable in case anyone needed to leave a coat." Michael's expression darkened. "You don't think she would?" A soft knock interrupted him, and Linda's voice came through the door. "Michael, the Hendersons are asking about your work with the conservation project. Could you come speak with them?" He opened the door to reveal Linda, perfectly composed in her designer dress, not a silver hair out of place. "Mom, did you move?" Sarah's jewelry box? The one with her grandmother's collection? Linda's expression flickered with something guilt, annoyance, before settling back into its usual mask of polite control. "Oh, that old thing? Yes, I tidied up in here a bit. The pieces in that box looked like costume jewelry, and I didn't think they should be left out with so many people in the house." "Where did you put them?" I asked, stepping forward, my voice tight with rising anger. "Well, they were quite tangled and disorganized, so I sorted them properly. The better pieces are in your jewelry box on the dresser." She gestured to the small modern case Michael had given me last Christmas. "The rest weren't really worth keeping. Tarnished silver, those old-fashioned settings, some with stones missing. Entirely. Frankly, they looked like something from a child's dress-up collection." Ice flooded my veins. "Linda, where are they now?" "I had Marta take them out with the trash," she said, as casually as if she'd discarded old newspapers. The collection was making the bedroom look cluttered, and I knew you wouldn't want guests seeing such shabby items if they came in to leave their coats. The room seemed to tilt around me. "You threw away my grandmother's jewelry?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Every piece she collected throughout her entire life? The only things I have left of her? Linda's expression shifted to one of defensive irritation. "Sarah, don't be dramatic. They were costume pieces, not valuable jewelry. If they meant that much to you sentimentally, you should have stored them properly, not left them in that beaten-up, old box." Michael's face had gone pale. "Mom, those pieces were irreplaceable to Sarah. How could you possibly think you had the right to throw them away?" "I was helping," Linda insisted, her voice rising slightly. "This is your first major entertainment as a married couple in your own home. Appearances matter." That box was an eyesore, and those trinkets were taking up space you could use for proper jewelry as you build your collection. "Robert gives me significant pieces for every important occasion. I'm sure he'd be happy to advise Michael on appropriate anniversary gifts going forward." I pushed past her into the hallway, my mind racing. When had Marta taken out the trash? Was it still in the bins outside, or had it already been collected? The thought of my grandmother's beloved collection sitting in a landfill made me physically ill. "Sarah, where are you going?" Michael called after me as I rushed through the crowded living room, ignoring the curious glances of guests. "To find the trash," I called back, not caring who heard or what they thought. This was no longer about appearances or Linda's approval. This was about recovering the only physical connection I had to the woman who raised me. Outside, the night air was cool against my flushed skin. Our trash bin sat along the side of the house, and I flung open the lid of the first one, the smell of garbage hitting me as I began to desperately sort through the contents. "Sarah, wait." Michael appeared beside me, immediately rolling up, his sleeves to help. "Let me do this. You'll ruin your dress." "I don't care about the dress," I said, tears threatening. "Those pieces are all I have left of her, Michael. Your mother had no right." "I know." His voice was tight with anger, not at me, but at the situation his mother had created. "We'll find them." Linda appeared at the back door, her silhouette framed by the warm light from inside. "What on earth are you doing? The Prestons just arrived, and you're out here digging through garbage?" "Come back inside immediately. You're creating a scene." Neither of us responded, continuing our frantic search through the first bin. When it yielded nothing but kitchen waste and packaging from the catering, we moved to the second bin. "This is absurd," Linda hissed, coming down the steps but stopping well short of the trash area. "You can replace costume jewelry easily if it means that much to you. I'll even pay for it. Though really, Sarah, it's time you developed more sophisticated taste." I whirled on her, years of suppressed frustration finally boiling over. Those costume pieces traveled the world with my grandmother? They were collected over decades of her life, each one with a story and meaning you couldn't possibly understand. They aren't replaceable, and they weren't yours to throw away. How was I supposed to know they had sentimental value? Linda shot back, her composure cracking slightly. They looked like junk. Tarnished silver, cloudy stones, outdated settings. Nothing anyone would actually wear to a proper event. At that moment, Michael lifted something from beneath a layer of discarded catering supplies, a clear plastic bag containing a jumble of familiar shapes. "Found them?" he said, relief evident in his voice. I rushed to him, taking the bag with trembling hands. Through the plastic, I could see my grandmother's collection, the amber pendant, the jade earrings, the roughly cut stones in their tarnished settings, and dozens of other pieces that had filled her wooden box. Linda was right about one thing. To someone who measured value only in carats and brand names, they might have looked like worthless trinkets. But to me, they were priceless. "Thank God," I breathed, clutching the bag to my chest. They're all here. Linda crossed her arms, clearly annoyed that her cleaning had been undone. Well, now that you've recovered your heirlooms, perhaps we can return to our guests. The Davidsons were asking about you, Michael, and they're significant. Potential donors to your conservation project. Michael's jaw tightened as he looked at his mother. You go on ahead. We'll be in after we've secured Sarah's jewelry properly. When Linda had gone, reluctantly returning to manage the social dynamics of the party, Michael turned to me. I'm so sorry. I should have realized she might pull something like this. It's not your fault, I said, carefully opening the bag to assess if anything had been damaged. But Michael, I can't do this anymore. The constant judgment, the undermining, the way she dismisses anything that matters to me. This was the final straw. He nodded, his expression somber. I know. Things need to change. I've let this go on too long, trying to keep the peace. After tonight, we're setting firm boundaries. We returned to the house, the bag of jewelry, clutched securely in my hands. The party continued around us, guests oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded outside. Linda held court in the living room, champagne in hand, laughing with a group of her friends as if nothing had happened. I went straight to our bedroom, Michael following close behind. Carefully, I laid each piece out on our bed, checking for damage. Most had survived their brief time in the trash unscathed, protected by the various cloth pouches and small boxes my grandmother had stored them in. But as I examined a particularly unusual pendant, a rough stone set in what appeared to be tarnished silver, something caught my eye. That's strange, I murmured, holding the piece closer to the light. I never noticed these markings before. Michael leaned in to look. What markings? Here, on the back of the setting. I pointed to tiny symbols impressed into the metal. And the stone itself? I always thought it was just an unusual quartz or something, but look at how it catches. The light. For the first time, I really examined the collection with an appraiser's eye rather than just sentimental attachment. My work at the gallery had exposed me to enough valuable pieces to recognize quality craftsmanship, even when tarnished or aged. And suddenly, I was seeing my grandmother's collection in a new light. Michael, I said slowly, I think some of these pieces might actually be valuable. Not just sentimentally, but monetarily. He picked up a heavy pendant, turning it over in his hands. This looks like it could be real silver under the tarnish. And this stone. I'm no expert, but that doesn't look like glass. A knock at the door interrupted us. Michael opened it to find his father standing there looking uncomfortable. Your mother sent me to check on you both, Robert said, his eyes taking in the jewelry spread across our bed. She's concerned about the impression your absence is making on the guests. I expected Michael to apologize, to promise we'd return shortly, his usual pattern with his parents. Instead, he squared his shoulders. Dad, Mom threw away Sarah's grandmother's jewelry collection. We just had to dig through the trash to recover it. Robert's eyebrows rose. She did what? Decided it looked like junk and had the caterers. Assistant trash it, Michael continued, anger evident in his voice. Without asking, without considering what it might mean to Sarah. Robert stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely perturbed. That was completely inappropriate. I apologize on Linda's behalf, Sarah. Thank you, I said, somewhat surprised by his reaction. He moved closer to the bed, his eye caught by the pieces laid out there. May I? He asked, gesturing to the collection. I nodded, curious about his interest. Robert picked up the pendant I had been examining, studying it with unexpected intensity. Where did your grandmother acquire these pieces? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. All over, I explained. She traveled extensively in the 50s and 60s. Many came from markets and small shops around the world. Some were gifts. She never cared about their monetary value, only the memories they represented. Robert turned the pendant over, examining the markings I had just noticed. Then he picked up a bracelet of rough-cut stones, studying. The clasp with a jeweler's loop he extracted from his pocket. Michael and I exchanged glances. "Dad, do you know something about these pieces? Shall we?" The look Linda gave me as they departed was filled with suspicion, but for once, I didn't shrink beneath it. There was something immensely satisfying about having a secret with Robert that Linda wasn't privy to, especially after years of being the outsider in Blackwell family matters. After they left, Michael and I collapsed onto our sofa, both physically and emotionally exhausted. "I can't believe my father actually apologized to you," Michael said, loosening his tie. "I don't think I've heard him apologize to anyone in years." "I'm more surprised by his secret gem collecting hobby," I replied. "Your mother made him sound like he lived and breathed nothing but Blackwell Industries." Michael shook his head. "Dad's always had interests outside the business, but he learned long ago to keep them private. Mom considers personal passions a distraction from what matters: social standing, company performance, maintaining appearances." "That's actually pretty sad," I said, thinking of my grandmother's colorful life, filled with travel and adventure and collecting beautiful things, simply for the joy they brought her. "It is," Michael agreed. "I wonder what would have happened if I'd known about Dad's gem hobby growing up. Might have felt less like a disappointment when I chose environmental science over corporate finance." I leaned my head against his shoulder. Maybe this is an opportunity to develop a different kind of relationship with him. "Maybe," Michael replied, though he sounded doubtful. Too many years of emotional distance couldn't be bridged overnight, even with the discovery of a shared interest. True to his word, Robert called the following morning. Linda had apparently gone to her weekly tennis match, giving him freedom to speak openly. "I've arranged for Elijah Kwan to examine the collection," he said without preamble. "He's the foremost expert on unusual gemstones on the East Coast, and more importantly, he's extremely discreet." "When?" I asked, surprised by the speed of the arrangement. "This afternoon, if that suits you. He happened to be in Boston for a conference and can make time at 3 o'clock. "That's fine," I agreed, simultaneously excited and nervous about having my grandmother's collection professionally assessed. "Should we come to you?" "No," Robert replied quickly. "Better to meet at your home. Linda will be at her charity board meeting until 6, and I'd prefer to have this initial assessment completed before she becomes involved." The implication that Robert was deliberately keeping this from his wife was startling. In all our previous interactions, he had presented a united front with Linda, backing her opinions and decisions even when he seemed personally disinterested. "Is everything okay between you and Linda?" I ventured carefully. A long pause followed. "Let's just say that I'm increasingly aware of how Linda's management of family matters has affected relationships, particularly between her and Michael, and by extension, you." Before I could respond to this surprising admission, he continued briskly. "I'll bring Elijah at 3. Please have the entire collection available for examination." Elijah Kwan proved to be a small, precise man with wire-rimmed glasses and hands that moved with remarkable delicacy. He arrived exactly at 3, carrying a leather case of specialized equipment. Robert introduced him as an old friend and trusted advisor, though the formal way they interacted suggested a primarily professional relationship. "Mrs. Blackwell," Elijah greeted me with a slight bow. "I understand you have some unusual pieces to evaluate." I had arranged my grandmother's entire collection on the dining room table, each piece carefully removed from its storage pouch or box and laid out on a black velvet cloth I'd borrowed from the gallery. Seeing everything displayed simultaneously was striking. Stones of various colors and cuts, settings ranging from simple silver to intricate metalwork, pieces from different eras and regions, all collected by one remarkable woman throughout her adventurous life. These were my grandmother's, I explained as Elijah approached the table. She collected them during her travels over several decades. Your grandmother had an exceptional eye, Elijah remarked, immediately drawn to a pendant I'd always been particularly fond of, an unusual green stone in a simple gold setting. Without touching it, he leaned close, producing a jeweler's loupe from his case. Most interesting. May I? I nodded, and he carefully lifted the pendant, examining it from every angle. Colombian emerald, he murmured. Untreated, natural inclusions consistent with Muzo mines. Late 1950s setting, Spanish influence but likely created in Argentina. He set it down gently. A museum-quality piece, particularly with appropriate provenance. Museum quality? I echoed, startled. It's that valuable? Value is subjective, Elijah replied, moving on to examine a bracelet of rough stones. But yes, to the right collector or institution, quite valuable indeed. Do you have any documentation regarding your grandmother's acquisition of these pieces? Letters, diaries, photographs of her wearing them, perhaps? I have her journals, I said slowly, and some photographs. She was meticulous about recording her travels. Robert, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. Documentation increases value substantially. Provenance is everything in the high-end market. Elijah continued his examination methodically, occasionally photographing particular pieces with a specialized camera and taking notes on a small tablet. His expressions remained professionally neutral, but several times he made quiet sounds of appreciation or surprise that sent my heart racing. After nearly 2 hours of careful assessment, during which Michael joined us and watched with increasing amazement, Elijah finally sat back and removed his glasses. Mrs. Blackwell, he said, seriously, your collection is extraordinary. Not simply for the quality of individual pieces, which is impressive, but for its comprehensiveness as a collection of mid-20th century artisanal gemwork from 5 continents. What exactly does that mean? Michael asked, looking between Elijah and his father. It means, Robert interjected, that Sarah's grandmother assembled a collection that tells a story, not just of her travels, but of a particular era in gemstone history, when small workshops were creating exceptional pieces outside the mainstream commercial jewelry industry. Elijah nodded in agreement. Precisely. The commercial value of the stones and metals alone is significant. I estimate between $1.8 and $2 million at current market rates. My breath caught. Million? Michael asked. Robert looked up, a strange expression crossing his face. I've been a collector of unusual gemstones for 40 years, he said. It's a private hobby Linda has always considered a waste of time and money. He set down the bracelet carefully. Sarah, I believe some of these pieces may be significantly more valuable than they appear. What do you mean by significantly? I asked, a strange feeling settling in my stomach. Robert picked up another piece, a necklace with what I had always thought were simply colored glass beads. This appears to contain raw Colombian emeralds, he said matter-of-factly. Uncut, unpolished, but genuine. And this, he indicated, the pendant he'd first examined, shows markings consistent with a small workshop in Brazil known for setting exceptional stones in deliberately understated metalwork during the 1950s. Their pieces are highly sought after by serious collectors. Now, my head was spinning. Are you saying my grandmother's costume jewelry is actually valuable? I'm saying, Robert replied carefully, that based on these few pieces alone, your collection could be worth a considerable sum. This pendant, alone, if it's what I think it is, could fetch upwards of $50,000 at auction. Michael's jaw dropped. $50,000 for one piece? Robert nodded, continuing to examine the collection with growing interest. Sarah, with your permission, I'd like to arrange for a proper appraisal of these pieces. I know a discreet expert who specializes in unusual gemstones and vintage settings. Of course, I agreed, still trying to process this unexpected turn of events. But why would my grandmother never mention their value? She lived so modestly. Some collectors care more about the pieces themselves than their monetary worth, Robert said. And for the first time, I felt a genuine connection with my father-in-law. Perhaps she simply loved them for what they were, not what they could buy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Linda had dismissed my inheritance as worthless trinkets, when in reality, they might be worth more than the designer jewelry she so prized. But more importantly, this revelation had shown me a side of Robert I'd never seen before, one with passion and knowledge outside the corporate world Linda had always emphasized. "What do we tell your mother?" I asked, looking between Michael and Robert. Robert actually smiled, a small, tired expression, but genuine. "For tonight, nothing. Let's get through this party. Afterward, I'll arrange for that appraisal, and then..." He paused, looking at the collection of supposedly worthless trinkets that his wife had so casually discarded. "Then I think Linda might benefit from learning that value isn't always obvious at first glance." For the first time since my grandmother's jewelry had disappeared, I felt a smile tugging at my lips. "I think you're right, Robert. Sometimes the most precious things are hiding in plain sight." We carefully returned the collection to my grandmother's wooden box, which Michael placed in our bedroom safe. Then, with newfound confidence, we rejoined the party. A party celebrating a home that reflected our values, not Linda's, filled with pieces chosen for their meaning, not their price tag. As I accepted a fresh glass of champagne, I caught Linda watching me from across the room, her expression a mixture of irritation and confusion at my apparent recovery from the upsetting trash incident. Little did she know that the evening's revelations were just beginning, and that her impulsive decision to tidy up my worthless trinkets would soon lead to a reckoning that would permanently shift the power dynamic between us. Because sometimes, I thought as I raised my glass in a mock toast toward my mother-in-law, true value isn't about appearance at all. It's about seeing beyond the surface to recognize the worth that others miss. The remainder of the housewarming party passed in a strange haze. With my grandmother's jewelry safely locked away, I rejoined the gathering with a renewed sense of confidence. The weight of Linda's judgment suddenly felt lighter, less significant. Every time she shot one of her disapproving glances my way, I thought of Robert's stunned expression when he examined those worthless trinkets and had to suppress a smile. "You seem different," Michael whispered as we stood together accepting compliments on our home from people who clearly wished we lived somewhere more prestigious, more relaxed. "I am," I replied, taking a sip of champagne. "I think something shifted for me tonight." The party wound down shortly before midnight, with Linda orchestrating departures as efficiently as she had managed arrivals. She had barely spoken to me since the trash incident, directing her comments exclusively to Michael whenever possible. Robert, too, maintained his distance, though I caught him watching me thoughtfully several times throughout the evening. After the last guest departed, Linda began issuing instructions to the cleanup crew while Robert stood quietly by the door, car keys already in hand. "We've arranged for the caterers to handle everything," she informed us, inspecting a slightly smudged windowsill with disapproval. "They'll lock up when they're finished. I've also scheduled a proper cleaning service for tomorrow morning to address any residual issues." "That won't be necessary," I said firmly. "We can handle our own cleanup." Linda's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Don't be ridiculous, Sarah. After an event of this caliber, professional post-event services are standard. I've already arranged it. And I'm unarranging it," I replied, my voice calm but resolute. "Thank you for your help with the party, Linda. But our home is our responsibility." A tense silence fell. Linda looked to Michael, clearly expecting him to override my objection as he had so many times before when caught between us. Instead, he placed his arm around my shoulders. "Sarah's right, Mom. We appreciate the offer, but we'll take it from here." Linda's mouth opened, then closed again as she searched for an appropriate response. Before she could formulate one, Robert stepped forward. "It's been a wonderful evening," he said smoothly. "Your home is charming, and your hospitality was excellent. Linda, we should let these young people get some rest." He turned to me. "Sarah, I'll be in touch about that. Appraisal we discussed." Linda's head snapped toward her husband. "Appraisal? What appraisal?" "Just a small matter Sarah and I were discussing," Robert replied vaguely. "Nothing important." "With an M?" "Yes," Elijah confirmed calmly, as if he hadn't just transformed my understanding of my inheritance. However, the cultural and historical significance potentially exceeds even that considerable sum. Museums and serious private collectors would find this collection particularly desirable if kept intact. "I had no idea," I whispered, looking at the familiar pieces with new eyes. All these years, I had treasured them solely for their connection to my grandmother, never imagining they held such extraordinary monetary value. "Few would," Elijah assured me. "That's part of what makes your collection special. These are not obvious treasures. Their value is subtle, requiring knowledge and context to fully appreciate." He glanced at Robert. "It's actually quite fortunate that they weren't upgraded or remounted by someone who didn't understand their significance." I thought of Linda dismissing them as shabby items and costume pieces, and a strange feeling settled over me. Not smugness exactly, but a quiet vindication. The collection Linda had so casually discarded was worth more than all her designer jewelry combined. "What should I do with them now?" I asked, suddenly concerned about security. "Should they be in a safe deposit box?" "I can arrange appropriate secure storage," Robert offered immediately. "And insurance, of course. Specialized collector's insurance, not standard homeowner's coverage. That would be helpful," I acknowledged, though part of me was reluctant to let the collection out of my sight, now that I understood its true value. Elijah closed his tablet case. "I can prepare a detailed appraisal document within the week, with photographs and estimated values for each piece in the collection as a whole. In the meantime," he produced a business card from an inner pocket. "I would be honored to discuss potential exhibition opportunities should you ever consider sharing your grandmother's legacy with a wider audience." After Elijah departed, promising complete discretion, Michael and I sat at the dining table staring at the collection in stunned silence. Robert remained standing, his expression thoughtful. "I never expected this," I finally said. "Nana Rose lived so simply. I can't imagine her knowingly carrying around millions of dollars in her wooden jewelry box." "She likely didn't know," Robert suggested. "Or perhaps she did, and chose to value them for their beauty and memory rather than their market price. Either way, she left you an extraordinary legacy." Michael shook his head in disbelief. "I still can't wrap my head around it. Mom threw away $2 million worth of jewelry because it didn't match her idea of what valuable things should look like." A smile tugged at the corner of Robert's mouth, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from him. "Linda has always been very certain about what constitutes value. It's an educational opportunity." "When are you going to tell her?" I asked, curious about his strategy. Robert checked his watch. "She'll be home from her board meeting soon. I think perhaps tomorrow, when Elijah's preliminary report is available. Some things benefit from official documentation." As Robert prepared to leave, I was struck by how differently I saw him now. The remote, work-obsessed father-in-law I thought I knew had revealed unexpected depths, a passion for unusual gemstones, a wry sense of humor, and what appeared to be a subtle rebellion against his wife's rigid value system. "Robert," I said, impulsively, "would you like to see my grandmother's journals sometime? The ones where she documented finding these pieces? They might add context to the collection." Something like genuine pleasure crossed his face. "I would like that very much, Sarah. Perhaps next weekend?" After he left, Michael pulled me into a tight embrace. Did that really just happen? Did my father just invite himself over to read your grandmother's travel journals? "I think he did," I laughed softly. "Apparently your dad has hidden depths. And you," Michael said, kissing the top of my head, "are suddenly a millionaire." The reality of our situation began to sink in as we carefully returned each piece to my grandmother's wooden box. These weren't just sentimental treasures anymore. They represented financial security, opportunities, choices we hadn't imagined having. "What do you want to do with it?" Michael asked as we locked the box in our home safe. "The money, I mean, if you decided to sell some pieces." I considered this seriously. "I don't know yet. It doesn't feel quite real. But I know I don't want to sell the entire collection. These pieces belong together. They tell my grandmother's story." "Whatever you decide," Michael assured me, "it's your inheritance. I'll support whatever feels right to you." His immediate affirmation that the collection belonged to me alone, not to us as married financial partners, underscored yet again why I had fallen in love with him. In the Blackwell world of strategic acquisitions and status symbols, Michael had always valued the intangible over the material. True to his word, Robert called the following afternoon with news that Elijah had prepared a preliminary valuation document. "I've forwarded it to your email," he said. "The final report will be more detailed, but this outlines the collection's estimated value and highlights particularly significant pieces." "Thank you, Robert. Have you told Linda yet?" A pause followed. "I thought perhaps we might discuss that in person. Would you and Michael be available for dinner this evening? At Gibson's, perhaps?" Gibson's was one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants, a place the Blackwells frequently entertained business associates and social connections. That Robert would suggest meeting there, a very public venue in their social circle, seemed significant. "I think we could manage that," I replied carefully. "Excellent. 8 o'clock. I've already made the reservation." He hesitated, then added, "It might be wise to bring photographs of several key pieces and perhaps Elijah's preliminary report." After hanging up, I checked my email and found Elijah's document, a 16-page preliminary assessment that confirmed his verbal estimate of the collection's worth. Several pieces were highlighted as museum quality or exceptional historical significance, with individual values that made my head spin. The green pendant Elijah had first examined was estimated at $175,000 alone. "So, we're really doing this," Michael said when I showed him Robert's text confirming our dinner reservation. Confronting my mother with proof that she threw away millions of dollars worth of jewelry. "It appears so," I replied, still trying to process the rapid evolution of events. "Your father seems almost eager about it." Michael considered this. "You know, I don't think I've ever seen Dad directly challenge Mom on anything important. He usually just disengages when they disagree. Retreats to his study or takes a sudden business trip. Well, he's certainly engaged now." I pulled up Elijah's report on my tablet. "Do you think this is just about the jewelry, or is something else happening between them?" Michael shrugged. "Hard to say. Their marriage has always been so performance-oriented, so focused on presenting a united front to the world. But lately, I've noticed Dad seems tired. Not physically, but like he's growing weary of the constant maintenance of appearances." Gibson's welcomed us with the deferential efficiency reserved for recognized names. The maitre d' escorted us to a corner table where Robert and Linda were already seated. Linda resplendent in a designer dress and sapphire earrings that caught the light with each precisely calculated movement of her head. "Michael, Sarah, how lovely of you to join us," she greeted, her tone suggesting we should be grateful for the invitation. I must say, I was surprised when Robert suggested this impromptu dinner. He's usually so averse to last-minute arrangements. Robert merely smiled, ordering a bottle of champagne as we settled into our seats. Champagne? Linda's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "Is there something to celebrate?" "Indeed there is," Robert confirmed, maintaining an unusual air of controlled anticipation. A rather remarkable discovery, in fact. Linda's gaze sharpened. "Related to business?" "Related to family," Robert corrected. "Specifically, to Sarah's family legacy." A flicker of annoyance crossed Linda's face. "I hardly think Sarah's background is cause for champagne, Robert. We've been quite generous in welcoming her despite her limited connections." I felt Michael tense beside me, but Robert merely continued smiling, appearing almost entertained by his wife's condescension. "As it happens," he replied smoothly, "Sarah's connections are far more significant than anyone realized, particularly in certain specialized collecting circles." The champagne arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation as the sommelier performed the ritual opening and pouring. Once he departed, Linda leaned forward slightly. "What are you talking about, Robert? You're being deliberately cryptic." Instead of answering directly, Robert turned to me. "Sarah, perhaps you could share what we discovered about your grandmother's collection." All eyes turned to me. I took a sip of champagne to steady myself, then reached for my tablet. "After the housewarming party," I began carefully, "Robert noticed something unusual about my grandmother's jewelry, the pieces you described as costume and shabby, and had thrown away." Linda's expression tightened. "Are we really revisiting that unfortunate misunderstanding?" "I've already explained—" "Please, Linda," Robert interrupted gently but firmly. "Allow Sarah to finish." The slight edge in his tone silenced her immediately, an unprecedented occurrence in my experience of their dynamic. I continued. "Robert suspected some of the pieces might be more valuable than they appeared, so he arranged for an expert assessment." I turned the tablet to display Elijah's report. "It turns out my grandmother's collection is worth approximately $2 million. Linda's reaction was everything I could have hoped for. Her perfectly controlled expression slipped completely, eyes widening and mouth falling open in genuine shock. "That's absurd," she finally managed. "Those tarnished old trinkets? $2 million? There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Robert assured her, taking the tablet and scrolling to specific pages. "Elijah Kwan conducted the assessment. Himself. You may recognize his name. He's consulted for the Museum of Fine Arts on their gemstone acquisitions and written definitive texts on 20th century artisanal jewelry. Here's the pendant you called something from a child's dress-up. Collection," I added, showing her a photograph of the green stone Elijah had first identified. "It's an untreated Colombian emerald worth $175,000. Linda's hands trembled slightly as she took the tablet, scrolling through the document with increasing agitation. "This can't be right," she insisted, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "These pieces looked nothing like fine jewelry." "That's precisely what makes them extraordinary," Robert explained, a certain satisfaction evident in his tone. "They're historically significant examples of mid-century artisanal gem work, created outside conventional commercial jewelry standards. Their value lies in their authenticity and uniqueness, not in conforming to expected appearances." I couldn't have scripted a more perfect response myself. The parallel between the jewelry's value and my own position in the Blackwell family, dismissed for not conforming to Linda's rigid standards, hung unspoken but unmistakable in the air between us. "You threw away $2 million worth of irreplaceable artifacts," Michael stated bluntly, addressing his mother directly. Because you couldn't recognize value that didn't match your preconceptions. Linda set down the tablet, visibly struggling to regain her composure. How was I to know? They looked worthless. That's rather the point, isn't it? Robert mused, signaling for the waiter to refill our champagne glasses. Value isn't always obvious at first glance. Sometimes the most remarkable treasures are overlooked because they don't conform to conventional expectations. Linda's gaze darted between us, clearly sensing she was missing some deeper subtext. "Well?" she finally said, attempting to salvage her dignity. "How fortunate that you were able to recover the pieces from the trash. Perhaps now, Sarah, you'll consider proper storage for such valuable items, rather than keeping them in that battered, old box." "Actually," I replied calmly, "I plan to keep them exactly as my grandmother did. The wooden box is part of their history, their authenticity. Elijah specifically advised against remounting or upgrading them, as that would diminish their historical significance and value." Linda's mouth tightened into a thin line. I could almost see her recalibrating, trying to find some way to reassert control over a situation that had completely undermined her authority. "Well," she said finally, lifting her champagne glass in what appeared to be a conciliatory gesture, "I suppose congratulations are in order. Who could have imagined that? Sarah's background would include such unexpected assets." The word choice was deliberate, reducing my grandmother's legacy to a financial transaction, attempting to pull the narrative back into her familiar territory of wealth and status. But the damage to her credibility was already done. For the first time since I'd entered the Blackwell family, Linda had been unequivocally, publicly wrong about something significant. "Indeed," Robert agreed, raising his own glass. "To Sarah, and to recognizing that true value often lies beneath the surface." As we clinked glasses, I caught Michael watching his parents with newfound interest. The subtle shift in their dynamic. Robert, gently but firmly challenging Linda's assumptions, Linda struggling to adapt to this unexpected resistance, suggested tectonic movements in a relationship I had always believed to be immovable. The remainder of dinner passed with surprising pleasantness. Linda, having failed to regain the upper hand, retreated into formal politeness, while Robert demonstrated uncharacteristic animation, asking thoughtful questions about my grandmother and her travels. By the time dessert arrived, it felt as though we were dining with a different set of in-laws entirely. As we prepared to leave, Linda made one final attempt to reassert her influence. "Given the collection's value," she said, her tone deliberately casual, "you'll want proper security arrangements. The family vault at Blackwell Tower would be ideal. Climate-controlled, maximum security, and of course, no additional cost to you." The offer appeared generous on its surface, but Michael and I exchanged knowing glances. Having my grandmother's collection locked away in the Blackwell corporate vault would effectively place it under Linda's supervision and control, something neither of us was willing to consider. "That's very kind," I replied politely, "but Robert has already arranged specialized insurance and secure storage options. The collection will remain with me as my grandmother intended." A flash of frustration crossed Linda's perfectly made-up face before she masked it with a tight smile. "Of course, just trying to be helpful." Robert placed a hand on his wife's shoulder, a gesture that somehow conveyed both affection and restraint. "Sarah understands the collection's value better than anyone," he said firmly. "It's in excellent hands." As we said our goodbyes outside the restaurant, Robert pulled me aside briefly. "I've taken the liberty of arranging a meeting with Harrison. Fellows at the Museum of Fine Arts next week?" he said quietly. "He's the curator of their special collections and an old friend. If you're interested in exploring exhibition possibilities, he'd be the person to advise you." "Thank you, Robert," I said sincerely. "For everything." He nodded, something like regret flickering across his features. "I should have paid more attention years ago. To many things. His gaze drifted to where Linda stood impatiently by their car. Sometimes we don't recognize what we've overlooked until something forces us to truly see. Driving home that night, Michael reached across the console to take my hand. "I've never seen my father stand up to my mother like that," he said, wonder evident in his voice. "Not once in my entire life. People can surprise you," I replied, thinking of the hidden depths we'd discovered in Robert, in my grandmother's legacy, and perhaps most importantly, in myself, especially when they're finally seen for who they really are. The revelation of my grandmother's jewelry collection's true value rippled through the Blackwell family like a stone dropped in still water. In the week following our dinner at Gibson's, I noticed subtle but significant shifts in how I was perceived and treated, not just by Linda, but by the extended family network that had previously taken its cues from her dismissive attitude toward me. My phone, once silent except for Linda's occasional directives about family gatherings, now chimed regularly with messages from Blackwell cousins, aunts, and family friends, suddenly interested in reconnecting or getting to know me better. Michael's cousin Diane, who had barely acknowledged my existence at family functions, called to invite me to join her women's philanthropic committee. Another relative asked if I might consider sharing my expertise in art valuation with her daughter, who was considering a similar career path. "It's fascinating, isn't it?" Michael observed as I declined yet another transparent invitation to lunch with someone who had previously snubbed me. $2 million hasn't changed who you are at all, but it's completely transformed how they see you. "Money is the only language some people understand," I replied, thinking particularly of Linda. To them, I've suddenly started speaking fluently. The most noticeable change, however, was in Linda herself. Since the dinner at Gibson's, she had retreated into an uncharacteristic silence, neither calling with her usual critiques nor appearing, unannounced at our door with helpful suggestions about our home. According to Michael, who had spoken briefly with his father, Linda was processing the situation. Processing what exactly? I had asked. That she was wrong about the jewelry, or wrong about me? Both, I suspect, Michael had replied. Mom's entire identity is built around being right, about people, about social standing, about what has value. You've fundamentally challenged that self-image. I wasn't naive enough to believe that one humbling experience would permanently transform Linda, but I did hope it might create space for a more balanced relationship moving forward. The unexpected ally in this transition proved to be Robert, who had begun calling every few days with updates about the security arrangements for the collection and, increasingly, just to chat about my grandmother's travels as documented in her journals. "I've been reading about Rose's time in Morocco," he said during one such call. "Her description of the artisan markets in Fez is remarkable. I could almost smell the spices and leather from her writing." "She had a gift for bringing places to life," I agreed, surprised and touched by his genuine interest. "I've always thought her journals deserved to be published someday." "They absolutely do," Robert affirmed. "Which reminds me, I spoke with Harrison at the MFA yesterday. He's very interested in meeting with you about a possible exhibition of the jewelry collection, alongside excerpts from Rose's journals. He thinks it could make an extraordinary presentation of mid-century global artisanal work through a woman, traveler's perspective." "An exhibition?" The idea caught me off guard. I had been so focused on the monetary value of the collection that I hadn't fully considered its cultural significance. "I'm not sure. These pieces are so personal." "Of course," Robert backtracked immediately. "It was just a thought. The collection is yours to do with as you wish. I simply thought, well, your grandmother's eye for beauty and adventure deserves to be celebrated." His phrasing, so similar to what my grandmother had always said about sharing beauty with the world, made me reconsider. Actually, I think Nana Rose would have loved the idea of her collection being appreciated by others. Let me think about it. Absolutely. No pressure, Robert assured me, though I could hear the enthusiasm in his voice. On another note, Linda and I are hosting a small dinner next Friday for some close friends. Nothing formal, just 6 or 8 people. We'd be delighted if you and Michael could join us. The invitation surprised me. Small, intimate gatherings had never been Linda's style, particularly not with Michael and me included. She preferred large, strategically orchestrated events, where interactions could be managed and social capital carefully exchanged. That sounds nice, I said cautiously. Is there a special occasion? No occasion, Robert replied. Just good food and conversation with people whose company we enjoy. After I hung up, I relayed the invitation to Michael, who appeared equally puzzled. A small dinner? At the house? Not at some restaurant where Mom can make an impression? That doesn't sound like her at all. Maybe your father insisted? I suggested. He seems different lately, more engaged, more willing to express his own preferences. Michael considered this. You know, I think you're right. Ever since the jewelry revelation, Dad's been more present, not just with us, but in general. I spoke to him yesterday about the conservation project's funding needs, and he actually listened. Really listened, instead of just waiting for me to finish so he could suggest I focus on something more substantial. The jewelry situation affected him too, I realized. Not just because he recognized the piece's value, but because it showed him that Linda's judgment isn't always correct. 40 years of marriage based on that assumption, Michael said, shaking his head. I can't imagine how that realization must feel. Friday evening arrived, bringing with it an unusual sense of anticipation rather than the dread I typically felt before Blackwell family gatherings. I chose a simple but elegant dress and, after some consideration, decided to wear one of my grandmother's pieces, a delicate silver necklace with small, rough-cut sapphires that Elijah had identified as Sri Lankan in origin and valued at approximately $45,000. Are you sure you want to wear that? Michael asked as I fastened it around my neck. Mom might see it as rubbing salt in the wound. It's not about that, I assured him. These pieces were meant to be worn and enjoyed, not locked away. Besides, your father might appreciate seeing one of the pieces in its proper context. The Blackwell home on Beacon Hill appeared unchanged as we approached. The same imposing facade, the same perfectly manicured boxwoods flanking the entrance, the same polished brass knocker that had always intimidated me. Yet something felt different as Robert welcomed us inside with genuine warmth. Sarah, Michael, come in, he greeted, embracing each of us. An unprecedented display of physical affection from a man who had always limited himself to formal handshakes. Everyone's in the living room. Cocktails before dinner. The small gathering proved to be exactly as described. Just 8 people total, including us. Besides Robert and Linda, there was an older couple introduced as the Harrisons. James was my mentor at Harvard, Robert explained. And a younger couple, Elena and Thomas Chen. Thomas is Elijah's son, Robert added quietly as he handed me a glass of wine. He and Elena are both curators at the Gardner Museum. I thought you might enjoy meeting them. It was such a thoughtful, personal touch, connecting me with people who shared my professional interests rather than the usual parade of Blackwell business associates and social climbers. I glanced at Linda, expecting to see disapproval at Robert's choice of guests, but she was engaged in what appeared to be a pleasant conversation with Elena, her usual rigid posture notably relaxed. When Linda noticed me, she approached with none of her typical critical appraisal of my appearance. Sarah, I'm glad you could join us this evening. Her gaze fell to my grandmother's necklace, recognition flickering in her eyes. That piece is lovely. One of Rose's, isn't it? Yes, I confirmed, bracing for some subtle dig about its unconventional design. Instead, she surprised me completely. It suits you perfectly. The color complements your complexion." She hesitated, then added, "Your grandmother had remarkable taste." The compliment, delivered without qualification or underlying criticism, momentarily stunned me into silence. "Thank you, Linda. That means a lot coming from you." Something like regret crossed her features before she nodded slightly and moved to check on dinner preparations. The evening continued to unfold in this unexpected fashion. Dinner was served not in the formal dining room with its imposing mahogany table and ancestral portraits, but in the smaller garden room overlooking the walled courtyard, where climbing roses were just beginning to bloom under subtle landscape lighting. The conversation flowed easily, touching on art, travel, conservation efforts, topics I had rarely heard discussed at Blackwell gatherings, where business dealings and social positioning typically dominated. Most surprisingly, Linda remained warm and engaged throughout the evening, asking thoughtful questions about my work at the gallery and listening attentively to the answers. When Thomas Chen expressed interest in seeing more of my grandmother's collection, she was the first to suggest having them all over for a private viewing. "We could make an evening of it," she proposed. "Sarah could share some of Rose's stories from her journals, and perhaps Thomas and Elena could offer their professional perspectives on the historical context of the pieces." I caught Michael's eye across the table, his expression mirroring my own astonishment. This collaborative, inclusive Linda was entirely unfamiliar territory. As the evening drew to a close, Elena pulled me aside while the others were saying their goodbyes. "I hope you don't mind my saying so," she began, "but your mother-in-law has changed remarkably since I last saw her." "You've met Linda before?" I asked, surprised. Elena nodded. "At several museum fundraisers over the years. She was always formidable, impeccably polite but distinctly cold. Tonight she seemed like a different person, more authentic, more present." "It's been a period of adjustment for everyone," I acknowledged carefully. "Certain family dynamics have shifted recently." "Well, whatever prompted the change, it suits her," Elena said. "And Robert seems absolutely rejuvenated. I don't think I've ever seen him so animated." After our guests departed, Linda invited us to stay for a nightcap, another unprecedented development. In the past, she had always made it clear when social obligations had been fulfilled and it was time for us to leave. "It was a lovely evening," I said sincerely as Robert poured small glasses of port. "Thank you for including us." "It was our pleasure," Linda replied. And the most surprising thing was that she seemed to genuinely mean it. After a moment's hesitation, she added, "I've been doing a great deal of thinking since our dinner at Gibson's." Michael and I exchanged glances, neither of us quite prepared for a direct acknowledgement of the jewelry situation. "About what?" Michael asked cautiously. Linda took a small sip of her port before answering. "About perception, about value, about how easily we can miss what's important when we're looking for the wrong things." She set down her glass with deliberate precision. "I've not been particularly receptive to seeing you clearly, Sarah, either your qualities or your contributions to this family." The admission, delivered without defensiveness or qualification, took my breath away. "I appreciate you saying that. Linda, it's not just about saying it," she continued, her gaze direct but not challenging. "It's about recognizing it. Your grandmother's collection forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my own biases, particularly regarding what constitutes worth." Robert, who had been quietly observing, reached over to take his wife's hand, a gesture of support I'd rarely witnessed between them. "Linda has been researching mid-century artisanal jewelry makers," he explained, "learning to see beauty in different forms than she's accustomed to appreciating." "It's been quite educational," Linda admitted, "both about jewelry and about my own limitations." She turned to Michael. "And about how those limitations have affected my relationships, particularly with you, Michael." Your father and I have had some long overdue conversations about expectations and individual paths. The vulnerability in her tone was entirely new. Linda. Blackwell acknowledging fallibility was like witnessing a natural phenomenon previously thought impossible. I glanced at Michael, who appeared equally stunned by this evolution in his mother. "That means a lot, Mom," he said finally, "to both of us." The moment hung between us, fragile, promising, tentative. While I had no illusions that decades of ingrained behavior would transform overnight, this acknowledgement felt like a genuine foundation for something different moving forward. Later that night, as Michael and I prepared for bed in our own home, we tried to process the evening's revelations. "I still can't believe it," Michael said, loosening his tie. "My mother actually admitted she was wrong, not just about the jewelry, but about her entire approach to relationships. People can change when they're given compelling reason to re-examine their assumptions," I replied, removing my grandmother's necklace and returning it to its soft cloth pouch. "The jewelry was just the catalyst." "Do you think it will last?" Michael asked, his voice carrying both hope and skepticism born from years of disappointment. "This new, self-aware version of my mother?" I considered the question carefully. "I think elements of it will. True growth isn't linear. She'll probably revert to old patterns sometimes, especially under stress. But something fundamental has shifted in how she sees herself in relation to others. That's not easily undone." The following Tuesday brought an unexpected invitation from Linda, a request for me to join her for lunch at the Museum of Fine Arts, followed by a visit to their gemstone and jewelry collection. The message arrived by text rather than her usual formal phone call and ended with a tentative, "If you're available, of course. No pressure." "Should I go?" I asked Michael, showing him the message. "Do you want to?" I hesitated. "I'm curious, honestly. This feels like an intentional olive branch, meeting on neutral territory that connects to my interests. Very un-Linda-like." "Then I think you should go," Michael encouraged. "Best case, it's another step toward a healthier relationship. Worst case, you get to enjoy the MFA's collection." I agreed to meet Linda at the museum cafe at noon on Thursday. Arriving a few minutes early, I was surprised to find her already waiting, dressed more casually than I had ever seen her in public. A simple linen dress rather than her usual structured designer wear, and noticeably less jewelry than she typically displayed. "Sarah, thank you for coming," she greeted me with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to." "I appreciated the invitation," I replied honestly. "It was thoughtful of you to suggest the MFA." A faint flush colored her cheeks. "Robert mentioned you enjoy their collection. I realized I've never actually asked about your interests beyond the most superficial level." The admission sparked a strange mix of emotions, vindication that she recognized her previous dismissiveness, but also compassion for how difficult such self-awareness must be after decades of certainty. Lunch proceeded with a kind of cautious pleasantness. We spoke about art, about the gallery where I worked, about an upcoming exhibition I was helping to curate. Linda asked questions that revealed she had done some research on contemporary art movements, another surprising development from a woman who had previously dismissed anything created after 1950 as merely decorative. After our meal, we wandered through the museum's jewelry collection, where Linda surprised me again with her newly acquired knowledge. This setting technique was common in North African workshops during the 1940s, she noted, examining a displayed necklace. "Similar to that amber pendant in your grandmother's collection, though hers has more sophisticated wire work." "You've really been studying," I observed. Linda nodded, a hint of self-consciousness in her expression. I dislike being uninformed about any subject. Once I realized how completely I had misunderstood the value of artisanal jewelry, I felt compelled to educate myself. "That's admirable," I said, meaning it sincerely. The ability to recognize a gap in one's knowledge and work to fill Rather than doubling down on ignorance, was a quality I hadn't previously associated with my mother-in-law. As we continued through the exhibition, Linda gradually steered our conversation toward more personal territory. "I've been reflecting on something Robert said after the dinner at Gibson's," she began carefully, "about how easy it is to overlook value when it doesn't conform to our expectations." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "It made me think about my own upbringing," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "Did Michael ever tell you about my background?" "Only that you came from a banking family in Connecticut," I replied, realizing I knew almost nothing about Linda's life before she became a Blackwell. A small, humorless laugh escaped her. "That's the official biography. The reality is somewhat different." She guided me to a bench in a quieter corner of the gallery. "I grew up in Bridgeport, not Greenwich. My father worked at a bank, yes, but as a teller, not an executive. My mother was a secretary at an insurance company." This revelation stunned me. Linda had always presented herself as Blackwell's equal in terms of social background and connections. When I met Robert at a charity fundraiser, I was working as a hostess to help pay my college tuition. "I was terrified he would discover I didn't belong in that world," she continued. "So I crafted a more suitable background. Replaced Bridgeport with Greenwich, the teller with a vice presidency, the public high school with a prestigious academy." "Robert doesn't know?" I asked, trying to process this unexpected confidence. "He knows parts of it now," Linda admitted. After the jewelry incident, I realized how ridiculous it was to continue hiding my true background after 40 years of marriage. The constant vigilance, the fear of exposure. It shaped everything about how I presented myself and what I valued. The parallels between Linda's fabricated identity and her treatment of me suddenly clicked into place. Her rigid adherence to Blackwell standards, her dismissal of anything that didn't conform to elite expectations, her fixation on appearances, all stemmed from her own insecurity, her fear that her carefully constructed facade might crumble if questioned. "That can't have been easy to maintain for so long," I said carefully. "It became second nature," Linda replied, "but also exhausting. Always monitoring every word, every reference to childhood, every family story to ensure consistency. Always feeling like an imposter who might be discovered at any moment." She shook her head slightly. "When I saw your grandmother's jewelry, pieces that didn't conform to what I'd been taught valuable jewelry should look like, it was instinctive to dismiss them. Anything that challenged the narrow definitions of worth I'd adopted threatened the entire framework I'd built my identity around." The vulnerability in her confession was so unexpected, so contrary to the image of Linda I had constructed over the years, that I found myself momentarily speechless. This woman who had made me feel perpetually inadequate was revealing herself to have been motivated not by genuine superiority, but by profound insecurity. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. Linda met my gaze directly. "Because I owe you an explanation, if not an excuse, for how I've treated you. And because I think perhaps you, more than anyone, might understand what it means to feel judged by standards that have nothing to do with your actual worth." The insight was surprisingly perceptive, acknowledging both her behavior and my experience of it without defensiveness. For the first time, I glimpsed the intelligent, reflective woman beneath the social performance, the person Robert must have fallen in love with before status and appearances overtook authenticity in their relationship. "I do understand that," I acknowledged quietly, though I never tried to be someone I wasn't, just someone you might eventually accept. "I know," Linda said, regret evident in her tone. "And that makes my behavior all the worse. You were genuine while I was performing, and I punished you for reflecting back what I feared most. That authenticity might be more valuable than perfectionism." We sat in thoughtful silence for a moment, surrounded by glass cases displaying jewelry from across centuries and cultures. Some conventionally precious, others valuable for their craftsmanship, historical significance, or artistic innovation. A perfect metaphor, I thought, for the diverse ways human worth could be measured beyond the narrow metrics Linda had previously applied. "I can't promise to transform overnight," Linda said finally. "Habits of thinking and behaving that span decades don't disappear with one revelation, no matter how profound. But I am trying to see differently, to value differently than I have before." "That's all any of us can do," I replied. "Be willing to reconsider our assumptions when confronted with evidence they might be flawed." As we left the museum later that afternoon, something had undeniably shifted between us. Not friendship exactly. Too much history existed for such an immediate transition. But perhaps the foundation for mutual respect, for seeing each other as complex individuals rather than roles within a family structure. "Harrison mentioned you're considering an exhibition of Rose's collection," Linda said as we walked to the parking area. "Robert is quite excited about the possibility." "I'm still thinking about it," I admitted. "Part of me loves the idea of sharing her legacy with others. Another part worries about losing the personal connection if the pieces become public artifacts." Linda nodded thoughtfully. "That's understandable. When valuable things have been private for so long, exposure changes them somehow." She paused, then added, "Whatever you decide, I hope you'll let me know if I can be of any assistance. I might have some useful connections in the museum world, and I'd be happy to facilitate introductions." The offer was delivered without her usual implication of social obligation or hierarchical positioning. A simple, genuine extension of help without strings attached. Another small but significant indicator of changing dynamics between us. "I appreciate that, Linda. Thank you." As we parted ways in the parking lot, she surprised me with a brief but genuine embrace. Our first physical contact that hadn't been a performative air kiss for social appearances. "Thank you for meeting me today," she said simply. "And for listening." Driving home, I reflected on how completely my understanding of Linda had been transformed. The intimidating, judgmental society matriarch had revealed herself to be a woman who had spent decades hiding her true background, living in fear of being exposed as an imposter in her own life. Her dismissal of my inadequate background had been projection of her own insecurities rather than genuine belief in social superiority. The revelation didn't excuse her years of subtle cruelty, but it made them comprehensible in a way they hadn't been before. And her willingness to acknowledge her behavior and its roots suggested possibilities for a relationship I had previously thought impossible. When I arrived home, I found Michael in the garden, working on the raised beds we had planned for growing vegetables. "How was it?" he asked, setting down his tools. "Enlightening," I replied, joining him in the late afternoon sunshine. "Your mother shared some things about herself I never expected to hear." As I recounted Linda's revelations about her background and her fears, Michael's expression shifted from surprise to thoughtful understanding. "That explains so much about how she raised us," he said when I finished. The constant emphasis on proper appearances, the panic whenever we did anything that might seem common or ordinary. "She was protecting herself the only way she knew how," I agreed, building walls so high that no one would question whether she belonged inside them. "And now," Michael asked, "where does this leave your relationship with her?" I considered the question carefully. In a new place. Not close friends, certainly, but maybe. Authentic adversaries becoming cautious allies. "I think we understand each other better now, even if we'll never be entirely alike." Michael smiled, taking my hand. "That's more than I ever thought possible between you two." "Me too," I admitted. But then again, I never thought my grandmother's worthless trinkets would turn out to be worth $2 million either. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. 3 months after the revelation of my grandmother's jewelry collection's true value, I found myself standing in the rotunda of the Museum of Fine Arts, surrounded by Boston's cultural elite and art enthusiasts. The exhibition, Unconventional Treasures, A Woman's Journey Through Global Artisanship, displayed 35 pieces from Nana Rose's collection, alongside excerpts from her travel journals, vintage photographs of her adventures, and contextual information about the artisans and traditions that created each piece. It's remarkable, Harrison Fellows, the museum's special collections curator, murmured beside me as we watched guests circulate through the carefully designed space. We've had more advanced media interest in this exhibition than anything else this season. The Boston Globe is sending their senior arts critic, and 3 national magazines have requested interviews with you. I still can't quite believe this is happening, I admitted, watching as a cluster of visitors leaned close to examine the emerald pendant that Linda had once dismissed as something from a child's dress-up collection. Now it sat on a custom-designed mount under perfect lighting, a museum placard detailing its Colombian origin, historical significance, and estimated value. "You've created something unique here, Sarah," Harrison said. "Not just a display of valuable objects, but a narrative about a remarkable woman's journey through a changing world, told through the pieces she collected along the way. It's personal and universal simultaneously." The decision to share my grandmother's collection publicly hadn't come easily. After my conversation with Linda at the museum, I'd spent weeks weighing the private value of my inheritance against the potential meaning it might hold for others. What finally convinced me was finding an entry in one of Nana Rose's later journals. "Beauty exists to be witnessed," she had written. "The greatest sadness would be for something extraordinary to remain hidden, unseen, its story untold. Whether a sunset, a piece of music, or a simple stone carved by skilled hands, sharing beauty is an act of generosity to the world." With those words guiding me, I had agreed to Harrison's proposal for a temporary exhibition. Robert had immediately offered to underwrite the entire project, ensuring my grandmother would receive proper recognition while removing any financial pressure from the museum. To my surprise, Linda had volunteered to co-chair the opening gala committee, leveraging her substantial social connections to ensure maximum attendance and visibility. Now, watching the exhibition come to life around me, I felt a complex blend of emotions: pride in my grandmother's legacy, gratitude for the unexpected allies who had helped bring it to public attention, and a bittersweet awareness that Nana Rose herself wasn't here to witness the appreciation of her extraordinary eye for beauty. "Your grandmother would be so proud," a familiar voice said, as if reading my thoughts. I turned to find Robert beside me, looking distinguished in his tuxedo, but with a warmth in his expression that had been absent in our early interactions. "Not just of the exhibition, but of you, for sharing her story so thoughtfully." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "For everything, Robert. None of this would have happened without you recognizing what those pieces actually were." He shook his head slightly. "I only saw their commercial value initially. You understood their true worth. From the beginning, the stories they carried, the connections they represented. I've learned a great deal from you about different forms of value." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Michael, who had been greeting guests at the entrance. "The mayor just arrived," he reported, "and 3 trustees from the Gardner Museum. Harrison, they're asking for you." As Harrison excused himself, Michael took my hand, squeezing it gently. "How are you holding up? Too overwhelming?" "I'm okay," I assured him. "Just trying to take it all in. It's surreal seeing Nana's collection like this. Pieces I used to play with as a child now treated as museum treasures." "They always were treasures," Michael reminded me. "The world just needed time to recognize what you already knew." We made our way slowly through the exhibition, pausing occasionally to accept congratulations from guests or to overhear their reactions to particular pieces. Near a display of rough-cut sapphires from Sri Lanka, we encountered Elena and Thomas. Chen, the curator couple from the Gardner Museum who had attended the dinner at the Blackwells. "Sarah, this is magnificent," Elena greeted me warmly. The integration of personal narrative with historical context creates such an intimate connection for viewers. We're actually discussing a similar approach for one of our upcoming exhibitions. The catalog is selling extraordinarily well, Thomas added. The gift shop manager told me they've already sold through half their stock in just the first hour. I had worked closely with the museum's publication team to create a companion book for the exhibition, featuring high-quality photographs of each piece alongside expanded excerpts from my grandmother's journals. 50% of proceeds were being directed to a scholarship fund for young women studying traditional artisanal techniques around the world, a tribute to Nana Rose's belief in preserving cultural craft traditions. "That's wonderful," I replied, genuinely pleased that others found my grandmother's story as compelling as I always had. I hope it inspires people to look more closely at what they might have dismissed as simply ethnic crafts or tourist souvenirs. It absolutely will, Elena assured me. You've created a framework for people to understand these pieces as living cultural documents, not just decorative objects. As Elena and Thomas moved on to examine the next display, I noticed Linda standing slightly apart from the main crowd, studying a collection of my grandmother's journal pages displayed in a glass case. Her posture lacked its usual rigid perfection, her expression thoughtful rather than evaluative. Excusing myself from Michael, I approached her cautiously. "Everything all right?" I asked. Linda looked up, a surprising vulnerability in her expression. "I was just reading about how your grandmother acquired this piece." She gestured to a displayed pendant of amber and silver. She traded her own gold bracelet to an artisan in Poland who had no money but extraordinary skill. She valued his craftsmanship more than the conventional worth of her gold. That was typical of Nana Rose, I said. She recognized value in unexpected places. "Unlike me," Linda said quietly, a statement rather than a question. "You're here now," I pointed out gently. "Supporting this exhibition, seeing these pieces for what they truly are. People can learn to look differently." A small smile touched her lips. "Some of us more slowly than others." She glanced around at the gathering crowd. "You've created something remarkable here, Sarah. Not just displaying valuable objects, but telling a story about perspective and what it means to truly see the world around us." The genuine appreciation in her voice, free from the backhanded compliments or subtle criticisms that had characterized our early relationship, caught me off guard. "Thank you, Linda. Coming from you, that means a lot." Our tentative moment of connection was interrupted by a museum staff member informing me that the formal program would begin in 10 minutes. As the evening's honoree, I was expected to give brief remarks about the collection and my grandmother's legacy. "I should finish greeting guests," Linda said, straightening her shoulders slightly. "But afterward, there's something I'd like to show you, if you have a moment." Intrigued by her mysterious statement, I agreed before making my way to the small podium that had been set up in the center of the rotunda. The nervousness I'd felt earlier in the evening dissipated as I looked out at the assembled crowd. These weren't just Boston's social elite or art world influencers. They were people who had come to appreciate my grandmother's vision and values. "Good evening," I began once the room had quieted. "Thank you all for joining us to celebrate unconventional treasures. This exhibition represents more than simply a collection of beautiful objects. It's the story of one woman's journey through a changing world and her unique ability to recognize value beyond conventional standards." As I continued my remarks, I noticed faces in the crowd, Michael watching with obvious pride, Robert and Linda standing side by side with a unified supportiveness I'd never witnessed from them before, Harrison and his museum colleagues nodding appreciatively at particular points. The room felt connected by a shared appreciation, not just for the monetary worth of the displayed pieces, but for the deeper values they represented. My grandmother Rose often told me that true worth rarely announces itself loudly, I concluded. Rather, it waits quietly to be discovered by those willing to look beyond surface appearances. I hope this exhibition encourages all of us to look more closely at the world around us, to seek beauty and meaning in unexpected places, and to value the human stories behind the objects that fill our lives. The applause was warm and genuine as I stepped away from the podium. Several people approached with congratulations and questions, creating a blur of conversations that kept me occupied for the next hour. Eventually, the formal portion of the evening concluded, transitioning to a more relaxed reception in an adjacent gallery. I was speaking with a journalist from an arts magazine when I felt a light touch on my arm. Turning, I found Linda waiting, patiently. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said with uncharacteristic deference, "but I wondered if I might borrow Sarah for a few minutes." The journalist graciously excused herself, promising to continue our conversation via email. As she departed, I turned my full attention to Linda. "You mentioned wanting to show me something?" "Yes." For the first time since I'd known her, Linda seemed almost nervous. "It's in the reception area. Would you mind following me?" Curious, I accompanied her through the crowded gallery and into the quieter reception space, where catering staff were arranging dessert selections and champagne for the evening's final toast. Linda led me toward a small side table that had been set slightly apart from the main refreshment area. "I wanted to give you this privately," she explained, lifting a wrapped package from the table, away from the general gift table and formal presentations. The package was small, but relatively heavy, wrapped in simple silver paper with a small card attached. Surprised by the unexpected gesture, I accepted it cautiously. "Should I open it now?" I asked. Linda nodded, her usual confident demeanor, replaced by an uncertain vulnerability I was still getting used to seeing. "Please, if you wouldn't mind." Carefully removing the wrapping, I revealed a wooden box remarkably similar to my grandmother's jewelry container. Not identical, but clearly selected with thoughtful attention to the aesthetic connection. Opening it, I discovered a single piece of jewelry nestled in velvet, a vintage brooch featuring a delicate silver tree with small colored stones set among its branches like fruit or blossoms. "It's beautiful," I said sincerely, lifting it carefully to examine the craftsmanship. The style was distinctive, clearly artisanal rather than commercial, with an organic quality to the metalwork that resembled the pieces in my grandmother's collection. "It was my mother's," Linda said quietly. "The only piece of jewelry she owned that wasn't from a department store. A local artisan in Bridgeport made it. She cleaned houses for extra money, including his. When she admired his work, he created this for her birthday, incorporating birthstones for each family member." The revelation that this was a family heirloom from Linda's carefully concealed past startled me. "Linda, I'm honored, but I couldn't possibly—" "Please," she interrupted gently. "I want you to have it. For years, I kept it hidden away, ashamed of its humble origins, its lack of prestigious hallmarks or designer pedigree. After seeing your grandmother's collection, understanding its value beyond conventional metrics, I realized how completely I'd betrayed my own mother's memory by dismissing the one piece of jewelry that genuinely meant something to her." I studied the brooch with new appreciation, noting the thoughtful placement of each small stone, the way the silver branches curved naturally like a living tree. "It's genuinely lovely, entirely unique." "Like your grandmother's pieces," Linda agreed. "Created with skill and intention rather than mass-produced for commercial value. My mother wore it every Sunday to church. Her one piece of special jewelry." She paused, collecting herself. "The card explains the rest." I opened the small envelope and removed a handwritten note on Linda's personal stationery. As I read her carefully penned words, emotion tightened my throat. "Sarah, please, accept this piece as both apology and appreciation. An apology for failing to see the true value in what matters to you, and appreciation for teaching me to look beyond surface appearances. You've helped me reconnect with parts of myself I buried long ago, including the memory of my mother's pride in this humble brooch. I can think of no better guardian for it than someone who truly understands that worth cannot be measured solely in conventional terms. With gratitude and hope for our continuing journey, Linda." I looked up from the note to find Linda watching me anxiously, a vulnerability in her expression I never would have thought possible when we first met. "This means a great deal to me," I said sincerely. "Both the brooch and what it represents. I thought perhaps it might be included in future exhibitions," Linda suggested tentatively. Another example of artisanal work from a different context. A working-class family in industrial Connecticut rather than exotic global locations. A different kind of journey, but perhaps complementary to your grandmother's story. The thoughtfulness of the suggestion, finding a way to integrate her mother's story with my grandmother's, despite their vastly different life circumstances, touched me deeply. This wasn't simply a personal gift. It was Linda actively participating in a new narrative about value, heritage, and authenticity. "I think that would be perfect," I agreed. "With proper attribution to your mother and her story, of course." Relief and pleasure softened Linda's features. "Thank you for understanding what this means to me. For most of my adult life, I've kept everything associated with my background carefully hidden. Sharing this piece publicly feels like finally honoring where I came from rather than hiding it." I carefully returned the brooch to its box, deeply moved by both the gift itself and the transformation it represented in our relationship. "Your mother would be proud," I said softly. "Not just of the success you've achieved, but of your courage in reclaiming this part of your history." Linda blinked rapidly, emotion momentarily overwhelming her customary composure. "That's a lovely thing to say." She glanced toward the main gallery, where guests were still admiring the exhibition. "We should probably rejoin the others." As we walked back together, I noticed Robert watching our interaction from a distance, satisfaction evident in his expression. When our eyes met, he offered a small nod of approval and something that looked suspiciously like gratitude. He had witnessed a healing that, months ago, would have seemed impossible. The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant blur of conversations, congratulations, and celebratory champagne. By the time the last guest departed and museum staff began the careful process of securing the exhibition for the night, I felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. Something profound had transpired. Not just the public celebration of my grandmother's collection, but a deeper reconciliation within the Blackwell family. "Ready to head home?" Michael asked, appearing at my side as I thanked the museum's security team for their vigilance. "More than ready," I admitted, the emotional weight of the evening finally catching up with me. But also, I don't know, fulfilled somehow? Tonight felt important beyond just the exhibition itself. Michael nodded, understanding as we collected our coats. "I saw you and Mom talking privately. Everything okay?" "Better than okay," I replied, careful to protect the intimacy of Linda's gift while conveying its significance. "I think we've finally found genuine common ground." Outside, the Boston night was clear and cool, stars visible despite the city lights. As we waited for our rideshare, Robert and Linda approached to say goodnight. "A triumph by any measure," Robert declared, his pride evident. The Globe's critic was practically effusive, which I've never witnessed before. He's notoriously difficult to impress. "The exhibition is remarkable," Linda agreed, her gaze meeting mine with newfound warmth. "But more importantly, it's authentic, a genuine reflection of both the collection and the woman who created it." "Women," Robert corrected gently. Rose assembled the collection, but Sarah brought it to life for all of us to appreciate. A collaboration across generations. Linda nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right. A legacy honored and extended. She hesitated briefly before adding Doriton and perhaps even expanded in unexpected directions. The subtle reference to her own contribution, her mother's brooch and the story behind it, created a moment of understanding between us that required no further explanation. We had begun building a new narrative together, one based on mutual respect rather than social hierarchy or judgment. After saying our goodbyes, Michael and I climbed into our waiting car, both lost in our own reflections about the evening's significance. As we pulled away from the museum, its classical facade illuminated against the night sky, Michael took my hand. You know what strikes me most about tonight? He said quietly. It's that all of this, the exhibition, Mom's transformation, Dad's engagement, everything, started because you refused to accept less than you deserved. Walking away from that wedding was the first domino. I hadn't considered the connection before, but Michael was right. My small act of self-respect, leaving Rebecca's wedding rather than accepting public humiliation, had initiated a cascade of events that ultimately led to tonight's celebration and reconciliation. Sometimes standing in your truth changes more than just your own circumstances, I reflected. It creates space for everyone to be more authentic. Including my mother, apparently, Michael said with wonder in his voice. If you'd told me 6 months ago that she'd be publicly embracing her working-class origins and giving you family heirlooms, I'd have thought you were hallucinating. People can surprise you, I said, thinking of Linda's handwritten note and the vulnerability beneath her carefully constructed facade. Especially when they're given the opportunity to be something other than what they've always believed they had to be. The following morning brought a flurry of media coverage of the exhibition opening. The Boston Globe's arts section featured a prominent photograph of me standing beside the display of my grandmother's emerald pendant, with a headline declaring, "Hidden Treasures, Remarkable Collection Challenges, Conventional Value." Other publications followed suit, each emphasizing the unexpected nature of the collection and its journey from nearly being discarded to museum celebration. What touched me most, however, was a small package delivered by courier around noon. Inside was a vintage leather-bound journal with a note from Robert. Found this at an antique book dealer. Thought Rose might appreciate another traveler joining her collection of journals, perhaps for recording the continuing journey of her treasures through the world. With admiration, Robert. The thoughtfulness of the gift, connecting to my grandmother's legacy while acknowledging that the story was still unfolding, brought tears to my eyes. I called Robert immediately to thank him. It was my pleasure, he said warmly. I've been thinking about your grandmother quite a bit lately. What remarkable foresight she had, collecting pieces that others overlooked but which contained both beauty and historical significance. She always said true value rarely announces itself loudly, I replied, running my fingers over the journal's smooth leather cover. A philosophy worth embracing more broadly, Robert agreed. Speaking of which, Linda and I were wondering if you and Michael might join us this weekend at our lake house in Vermont. Very casual, just family. Linda mentioned wanting to hear more about your plans for potentially expanding the exhibition to other museums. The invitation to a private family retreat rather than a formal social occasion represented yet another shift in our relationship. That sounds lovely. I'll check with Michael, but I think we're free. Excellent. Robert sounded genuinely pleased. Oh, and Sarah. Harrison called this morning. Attendance numbers for the first day of the exhibition broke records for a special collection opening. Apparently, your grandmother's story has struck a chord with people. After ending the call, I sat quietly with the new journal, contemplating the remarkable turn my life had taken. 6 months ago, I had been the perpetual outsider in the Blackwell family, tolerated but never truly accepted, my background and career viewed as regrettable but not quite disadvantageous enough to offset Michael's poor judgment in marrying me. Now I was not only accepted, but actively sought out, my perspective valued rather than dismissed. The transformation had begun with a moment of crisis, Linda's impulsive decision to discard my worthless trinkets, but had evolved into something far more significant than simple vindication. What could have become a permanent fracture had, instead, catalyzed genuine growth and reconciliation. Linda's discovery of the jewelry's monetary value had opened the door to recognizing other forms of worth she had previously overlooked, including her own authentic history and the value of genuine connection over social performance. Opening the blank journal, I picked up a pen and began to write, not quite sure where the words were leading, but feeling compelled to document this unique moment. Value transforms depending on the eyes that perceive it. What appears worthless to one perspective may contain immeasurable richness to another. Perhaps the true measure of wisdom is not in confidently assigning worth based on conventional metrics, but in remaining open to discovering value in unexpected forms and places. My grandmother understood this intuitively. I'm learning it through experience, and remarkably, others are learning it alongside me, proving that it's never too late to develop new ways of seeing the world and each other. The doorbell interrupted my writing. Opening the front door, I was surprised to find a delivery person holding an elaborate floral arrangement. Not the standard roses or lilies of conventional congratulatory bouquets, but a stunning display of unusual blooms in vibrant colors that seemed to capture the spirit of my grandmother's eclectic tastes. The card read simply, "To unexpected treasures and new beginnings, with appreciation for teaching an old dog new tricks. Linda." I smiled, placing the flowers where they caught the morning light streaming through our windows. Their unconventional beauty seemed a perfect metaphor for the journey we'd all taken. From rigid expectations of what constitutes value to a more expansive, nuanced understanding that leaves room for surprise, growth, and genuine connection. My phone chimed with a text from Michael. "Museum just called. 3 school groups requested special tours of the exhibition this week. Your grandmother's story is officially educational content now. She would love that." I texted back, "She always said her greatest wish was for her collection to inspire others to see beauty in unexpected places." "Mission accomplished," Michael replied. "And speaking of unexpected, Mom just invited us to the lake house?" "Already said yes," I confirmed. "Surprising? 6 months ago? Incomprehensible. Today? Just another miracle in the season. Of Linda's great awakening. See you tonight. Love you." Setting my phone aside, I returned to the journal Robert had given me, continuing where I'd left off. Perhaps the most valuable treasures aren't the ones we can price or display behind glass, but the moments of genuine connection that transform our understanding of ourselves and each other. My grandmother collected beautiful objects, yes, but what she was really gathering were stories, experiences, and perspectives that expanded her vision of the world. In sharing her collection, I've unexpectedly created space for new stories to emerge. Not just about unusual jewelry from distant lands, but about the journeys we take toward authenticity in our own lives and relationships. That may be the most unconventional treasure of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.